I suppose think about how why I started doing a PhD. It might have been a follow-on from some of the concerns I just had thinking about three issues that were kind of theoretical problems around my work, but around thinking about painting in general as well. One of them was these different kinds of deaths of painting that one always has in one's mind, or I had in my mind. And I think very often there are there's different endpoints to painting historically throughout since Malevich, and one either responds to them or evades them or kind of just shuts them away, but they tend to be insistent. And here's Malevich on his deathbed with the black square above him, and this black square was actually carried out as an icon ahead of his coffin when he died, for his funeral procession. And there is also on the left of this image a kind of a collection of his work that he did after the black square. The black square tends to be that a moment where there is forefronted an end of representation in painting, there's it's a kind of a final point that continuously or is never quite made but is continually made. Nikolai Tarabukin, Rodchenko saw the black square as still full of representation. It was stuck with this kind of idea of iconography. It was mystical, and he responded by making monochromes that were just material. So he painted this yellow, red, and blue square just as a kind of a response, as a critique of Malevich. And then Nikolai Tarabukin critiqued Rodchenko's effort, still saying painting stuck in representation is still opaque, it's still dumb and stupid, and he called artists to put down their paintbrushes and go into the factories and really enter society in an engaged way as an artist. It was kind of like the first call to relational aesthetics in a way, but it was in 1922. So that was one aspect of doing the PhD, is to actually kind of really think through the different ends that painting has gone through and continues to go through, which should be a problematic every time one approaches work, or maybe not. That's maybe a question to talk about. But another problematic was this relationship that Sadie talked about, which is a relationship between writing and making work. And it is a problematic in the PhD, but it's a problematic anyway. And I would really right from the beginning started to think about the distinction, because there is although as you say, it's a sort of an uneasy relationship that you hope they get along. The very nature of how an artwork works is so different to how a text works, how a thesis works. Perhaps I should revise that, not a text, but an idea of a thesis, a written claim. And it's to think about different kinds of knowledges that are withheld within an artwork, which are different, and to kind of work out that relationship. But it's a relationship that's problematic in art history. It's not just problematic when doing a PhD in relation to practice. And art historians always come up against this problem. And here's an image that Georges Didier Huberman was writing about, talking about. It's Fra Angelico in San Marco. And he talked about coming across this painting in his introduction to Confronting Images. And he's writing as an art historian stroke sort of phenomenologist. And he talked about kind of the problem of encountering a work like this first of all, just what it is experientially coming across it. And first of all, you experience a kind of blindness that the work is below a window which is facing at you. So your eyes have to adjust to this beam of light. And then he talked about how there are different approaches in art history to encountering this image. So you have Panofsky and his very developed Renaissance code of iconology, where you could decode this painting, and it's about a relationship to legibility. That you would read this painting in terms of the codes that are given. So you would have the angel's gesture, you'd have the Dominican monk in the background, you'd have the more supplicant gesture of the Virgin. But he was thinking, is this the work? When you decode something in terms of meaning, what it means, what it says, is this an actual encounter with the work? And it's actually something that we, in just talking through our work today, whether one's actually talking about work or whether one's talking about a text associated with the work, there's a distinction there. And he found, when trying to write about this work, a kind of an undoing of language. He found that actually what really is this work is confounded him. And he started sort of trying to make utterances, kind of like onomatopoeic kind of grunts, to try and express this kind of the physical phenomenological response, material response he had. And he was saying that actually one of the insistent experiences of this painting is the space between the two images. It's not about reading the work or decoding it in a legible way, but it's this kind of this idea of white on a white wall, a white paint, this white stucco, and he started inventing stupid words like a whack of white, in order to somehow bring and it's kind of as an art historian, all he's doing is he's raising the problem of a relationship of writing to work. Another thing that I was a personal concern was this relationship of painting to the model, and it was also a sense of my own problem with oh no, we've got this timer thing on. Some of the images pre-timed, I don't know why, but there is here one's got a picture of these very formally looking architects in suits and talking incredibly seriously over what seems to be a very playful image of polystyrene cups and pieces of plaster and detritus on a table. For me, the model brought a kind of a way of rethinking painting. In that I'd come across an exhibition of Rem Koolhaas images in the ICA in the sort of mid-90s, or no, it was 98, I think. But and it was at a time when I was really finding none of the things I was making convincing, and there was this sense of an extraordinary, both a pragmatic quality to these objects that Rem Koolhaas's office had produced, as well as a kind of a poetic, and a playfulness. And it started to make me think these different possibilities of the model in relation to the painting, and if the painting is dealing with the problem of representation, and in a sense the impossibility of representation, or dealing with the baggage of these different endpoints, the model somehow defers this problem, and you have in the model's potential both an idea of representation, or models of something that exists, or you're making something. You've got the idea of the model as a playful, experimental form, working out ideas in a very pragmatic, sort of interchangeable way. And then you've got this kind of an idea of the utopian model, the idea of the model that is proposed in the future. Apologies to people who, in my own group, who've heard some of this, there's in that sense, this image here is of HFG Ulm. It's a kind of a group in the 60s that were interested in social development. But I was just interested just in the gesture of what the model could be in relation to painting, that somehow if one thinks about a model's relationship, a painting's relationship to model, it kind of allows one to revisit things in a way that otherwise, if one just looks at it in terms of various canons of art history, would make it very difficult. And a model, a Mike Webb inflatable. So these different issues of the death of, death of painting, I don't know if it's or the problem of thinking and writing about painting, and also the model brought me to one aspect of the PhD, which was looking at Melnikov. Just another thing about the model, and also in relation to the text, is I found that there was in terms of the problematic of writing, the thesis is problematic in relation to the artwork, the idea of a positivist development of an argument. And very often the PhD, and it's something that I'm sure loads of people have dealt with and struggled with, is very much it's set up on a scientific model of methodology, where you have either making claims and then creating experiments and then showing one's claims, or you've got the thesis, the antithesis, the synthesis. These are kind of like PhD models that are set up as a kind of expectation that somehow gives argument a legitimacy. And if your methods courses, if you have methods courses, or if you have people telling you what a PhD is, it's something to really right away question, and just question on where does the legitimacy lie, and it's something we've begun to talk about in our research group in the Royal College. But the issue of writing then, one of the things about the model is it suggested a kind of fragmentation. A lot of what's come up already today is also some of my concerns. Beth talked about fragmentation, and the model is, in one aspect, fragmentation has a philosophical form that was carried in philosophy, or arguably carried in philosophy, from the Jena Romantics, and the idea of the Athenaeum fragments that Novalis and the Schlegel brothers began to put forward as a riposte, or somehow an opposition to Hegel's traditional thesis. If Hegel's idea of aesthetics is built on a kind of a panoramic development of art history, and he would go from classicism to romanticism, and this kind of sweep of history. The Athenaeum fragments were philosophical propositions that were kind of in their form, in the actual writing, was questioning this idea of a unified text, which, in terms of the relationship of the model, in my work, seemed to make a lot of sense, that one could develop a form of writing that somehow reflected some of the concerns that were being carried in the work. So that's another relationship of writing to the model. And then, so then the issue of the studio is something where all these things become played out. Again, I'm so interested in that every person's presentation today involved the studio in very direct ways and indirect ways, but it seems to be something that is insistent, and it's something that's really under threat in art schools at the moment.